Hey guys, welcome to CSC105, Building a Console Application. So I want to start off by just talking about the structure of this course because this is a unique course that we have at Xamarin University in regards that we're not going to really be learning new material. Instead, we're going to be reviewing old material from previous C# classes and applying that knowledge to build a real-world application. So throughout this course, we're going to be focusing on building a journal application. The idea is we want to be able to store some text in a password-protected fashion. So as you can see, when the console application is loaded, it displays a menu. And the menu has some options. The first option is to unlock the journal. And once you unlock the journal, then you're able to create a journal entry. You can read that entry at a later point. You can relock the journal so that no one else can read the entry. And then you can quit the program. Now, one thing that I want to point out about this application is that in the previous C# courses, we haven't talked about collections yet. So we are limited to only creating a single journal entry at a time. But as you progress through the remaining C# classes and you learn about collections, you'll be able to adapt this program and add in multiple entries as well. Alright, so throughout this course, we're going to focus on 4 main topics. First, we're going to start off looking at how we can build a custom data type by defining a new class. Then we'll look at properties and why they're important for controlling access to our data. Then we'll look at loops as a way to repeat a set of code over and over. This will be useful when we're building our menu system. And then finally, we'll look at methods as a way to add behavior to our custom types that we create. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to jump into a demo. I want to open up the completed solution for today's exercise and show you what exactly we're building. We're not going to go through the code just quite yet. Instead, I just want to show you the overall application and how it functions. Alright, so here we are in the completed solution for the entire application. I'm going to go ahead and run this. So here is our console-based application. You can see we display some type of message in the beginning, and then we display our menu. So the first thing we have to do is we have to unlock the journal in order to create or read. And to prove that, if I type in 2 to create an entry, you can see it says you must unlock the journal first. So I'll go ahead and untype 1, and it says enter the journal password. Right now my password is just 1234. I'll hit enter, and it says the journal is open. Now once it's open, if I hit 2 again, now it allows me to type a journal message. So I'll say hello world, hit enter. Once I do that, let's say for example I lock the journal. So I go ahead and hit 4. Now my journal's locked. If I go ahead and try to read the entry by hitting 3, you can see I have to unlock the journal first. So once again, I can unlock it, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then now if I go to read my entry by hitting 3, I can see the message was hello world, and I can see a date and time that it was edited. Finally, I can go ahead and I can quit by hitting 5, and now the program is done. Alright, so now it's our turn to go through and build this application using the knowledge from the previous C# classes. So to get us started, we're going to begin with talking about building a custom type. So we're going to talk about how we define a C# class, including the syntax. We'll talk about how we can add fields into our classes to store data. And then finally, a class is just a blueprint, so we have to learn how we actually allocate memory and create an instance or object of that class. Alright, so what exactly is a class? So I want to start off by defining a class as a blueprint. It allows us to define a custom C# type that models something in the real world. But remember, it's a blueprint. So what does that mean? Let's go through some examples. So let's say, for example, I was building a mobile application that was dealing with managing the maintenance of my car. Now, it would make sense in object-oriented programming to build types that represent that problem domain. So with the car application, it would make sense to have a class of type car. Now, inside that car, we would place all the car-specific things. For example, the amount of miles the car has. Another example is a dog. If we were building a dog application, maybe a grooming application, a type that we would maybe see is a type for a dog. And then finally, another example would maybe be a message class if we're building an instant messaging application. Now remember that these are just custom data types. Built into the .NET Framework and C# language are pre-existing data types, things like integers, strings, the random class. There's a lot of built-in data types, but they don't always match our problem domain. So by building a custom type, we can make it unique to the problem we're solving. Now, when it comes to actually creating and defining the class, there's a few things we need to know. So first, we need the class keyword. That's what actually identifies this as a class. And then we give it a name. So in this case, we're creating a class called car. Now, the car itself is going to be defined by the members inside of it. So all the members, which we'll go through, are going to be inside of these curly braces. That's considered the body of the class. So what types of things go inside of classes? Well, the most fundamental are classes contain data and they contain behavior. So the data that a class has is its fields. So as you can see, a car has a year that it was made. A car has a make and a model. It's the data that is surrounding that object. So those are fields. Classes also have behavior, which are defined by methods. These are the things that the class or object can do. So for example, a car can turn on its radio. A car can accelerate. A car can be locked, unlocked. There are lots of things that you can think of. Now, you have to remember that a class definition itself is just a blueprint. And that means that you really can't do anything with it until you create an object and load it into memory. So the way that we do that is by using the new keyword. So as you can see here, we created, remember, the blueprint for car, and now we're actually creating two instances of that car. These two cars are separate in memory. They each have their own fields, their own memory block, and we can interact with them separately as well. Alright, so it's already time to jump into our first exercise that we're going to work through together. In this first exercise, we're going to focus on building the journal class itself to represent the journal data and behavior. Alright, so here we are in the exercise 1 instructions. So as you can see, in the first exercise, we're creating the journal class, and this is the output of the final solution for the first exercise. It's going to just display our journal message. So to do that, we're going to go through together and build a new console application. Then we'll create the journal class and we'll add some fields to store things like the message, the password, and whether or not the journal is unlocked. And then we'll look at actually creating an instance of the journal class and printing out the journal message. So let's go over back to Visual Studio and let's get started by creating our project. Alright, so here we are. So to get started, we're in Visual Studio on Windows. We're going to go up to File, New, Project. And in this project dialog, we're going to be looking for, under Visual C#, we're going to be looking for a console application using the .NET framework. Now you can give this any name that you want. I'm going to call mine the Journal app. You can call it whatever you'd like. Save it in a location that you can find easily. And I'm going to click OK. Now this is going to go off and create all the required solution files like program.cs. And there you go, we have it. So here we are, we have a brand new console application. So our first step is we want to build the main journal class, which is going to be responsible for managing the journal's data and behavior. So we're going to right click on our project up in the Solution Explorer. We're going to go to Add New Item. And in this dialog, we're going to be looking for a class. So we'll click on Class, and we'll come down here and we'll call it Journal. And we'll click Add. So now we have a class called Journal. And now we're going to start creating some data. So first we want a journal message. So we're going to say public string. Our message is a string. We'll call this our journal message. Now with the naming here, you can call whatever you want. Since we're inside the journal, you could just call it message itself. It's up to you. Doesn't really matter for our purposes. So we'll call it journal message. And we'll actually give it a literal value right here. So we're going to say, welcome to my journal. You can also put any message that you'd like here. You don't have to copy what I'm doing. You can be unique. So we have the journal message. Let's also now create some more fields. Let's create a password and whether or not the journal is unlocked. So we're going to make the password and unlocked private because we don't really need to access this from main directly. We're going to be using this as kind of internal state for the journal class itself. So we'll say private string journal password, and we'll give it a password. I'm going to say 1234 again. And then we'll also say private bool journal unlocked, and we'll say by default it is not unlocked. So by default it is locked. Okay, so we have our simple journal class. Now that we have this blueprint, we want to actually use it. So back in program.cs, we're going to actually create an instance of our journal. So we'll say journal, we'll give it a name, we'll call it my journal. And then we have to use, remember, the new keyword to allocate memory and create an instance of this journal. So now I can actually use my journal, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to display into the console the journal message. So I'll say console.writeLine my journal dot journal message. So I'm printing out the journal message. I go ahead and I run this. Give it a second to compile. And here we go. There is the message, welcome to my journal. All right, so now we have a basic journal application up and running. Now we're going to focus on properties and why they're useful for protecting access and controlling access to our fields. So we're going to start by looking at creating a full-blown property, and then we'll look at creating a shorthand property called an auto-implemented property. All right, so what exactly is a property? And the simplest definition that I can think of is that a property is a member in a class that can help us control access to the data stored in that object or class. So let's first go through the syntax of creating a property, and then I'll talk about why they're useful. So when we create a property, we start off by defining a backing field to actually store the data. Remember, we store data by creating fields, and even with properties, we still have to do that. The difference is that when we define the property, which is the next line, we define it very similarly to a field. Notice how there's almost no difference. The property is public so that we can access it, but besides that, we're just missing the semicolon. Now, it isn't until we actually create the body of the property until we start seeing a difference. So inside the body, you can see we have a get portion. The get portion is what it's used to actually retrieve the value of that backing field. And then the set portion is used to update the value of that field. All right, so let's kind of go through this a little bit deeper. So in the get portion, like I said, the job is to just simply return the value of the underlying field. So in this case, since we don't have any additional logic required, we're just returning miles exactly how it is. So we just say return miles semicolon. Now in the set portion, this is a little bit more complicated. The first thing I want to point out is this keyword value that you're seeing. Value is what represents the actual value that's being assigned to this property. So in the next slide, I'll show you where that's coming from, but it's the actual data from the caller. So notice that I'm adding some validation here. I'm saying if value is greater than or equal to 0, then take the value and update the underlying field. So this is really highlighting the importance and usefulness of a property. It allows us to add additional logic so that we can protect and control access to our field. So what this means is a user of this class can no longer come and assign a negative value to my field. This setter is making sure that that never happens by basically rejecting any value that is less than 0. Okay, so well, how do we use a property then? And the simple answer is you use it just like it was a field. There's really no difference from the consumer side of a property versus a field. So on the left-hand side, this is how we update the value of a property. Notice it's just a simple assignment. I say Sam's car dot miles equals, and I assign it a new value. Now, keep in mind, this number 10 here, that's what actually value becomes. So if I go back for a second here, value in this situation is represented by 10. So whatever you assign here, that's what becomes value in the property itself. And then on the right-hand side, this is where we're actually reading the value. And once again, it's just like a field. I just access the name of the property, and I dump it into a console.writeLine. I can dump it into a string. Whatever I want to do, I just access it by name to read the value of the property. Now, it's common to see situations where you create a property, but there really is no need for any extra validation code. So for example, here we have our car class again. We created our backing fields called model, and then we have our property called model. And notice that in the get and set accessors, we're simply returning the value and assigning the value. We're not adding any additional logic because we don't need any. In this situation, we're saying that the model can be any string and we're not going to validate it. And like I said, you'll find that there are many times when you're writing code that this will happen. And you can imagine that it's very tedious writing two members, basically, a field and a property, just to represent this code that does not need to be validated. So, as a convenience to us, there's a shorthand called an auto-implemented property. So an auto-implemented property looks like this. It says public string model. The first thing you want to notice is that in the get and set section, we don't have anything at all. We don't have a return statement, and we aren't using that value keyword. So it will do those by default. And also notice that we have no backing field. So with an auto-implemented property, the backing field is automatically created and injected into the class for you, so you don't have to worry about it at all. So this single line replaces the entire field and property definition. All right, so now let's take the knowledge of creating properties and let's go back to our exercise. We're going to now create another class called a journal entry, which will capture all the data related to an entry itself, and then we'll look at creating a property of type journal entry as well. All right, so here we are in exercise number 2, and what we're looking to do here is we're looking to first create another class called journal entry. And the journal entry class is going to capture all the data related to the entry itself. So that will be the text of the entry and the last time the entry was edited. Then we're going to take that new class and we're going to create a property of it back in our journal class. And we'll look at actually checking to see if the journal is locked, and we'll add some logic there to make sure you can't access this journal entry unless it's unlocked. Alright, so let's jump back to our code and let's build this. Alright, so let's get started by building the journal entry class. So once again, right click on your project, go to add new item, select class, and let's call this our journal entry and add that. Now inside the journal entry, we're going to start off by creating an auto implemented property to represent our date time. So we'll say public date time. Now this date time structure is a built-in data type. This comes with the .NET framework. So we're going to use that data type and we'll call it the last edit time. Once again, you can call this whatever you want and then add a get and a set. So this is an auto implemented property. Remember, there's no backing field required for that. Now that we have that, we're going to also create the text. So for this, we're going to make a full-blown property. So step one is we have to create the backing private field. So we'll say private string text. And then we'll actually create the public facing property. So public string uppercase text. And then inside the body, we'll create the getter and setter. So first get. Inside the get, we're going to return the backing field. We don't need any additional logic. So we'll just say get return text. And then in the setter, so we'll say set. In the setter, we'll say first, let's update the value of the backing field. So we'll say the text is equal to whatever was typed in to the property. And then we also want to make sure we update the date time. So we'll say the last edit time is whatever the time is at this point that we changed. So datetime.now. So that's really the reason why we created a property instead of a field for the text, simply so that if we update the property, we can update the last edit time as well. Cool, so we have our journal entry. Let's head back to our journal class, and now we're going to create a property for the journal entry class. So first step, create our backing field. So we say private journal entry. We'll call this our entry. And we'll instantiate it here in line. And then let's create the public facing entry. So we'll say public journal entry. And then for our get, this is where we're going to add the logic to make sure we can't access the entry unless it's unlocked. So we have this field called journal unlocked. Let's use it. So we'll say if the journal is unlocked, then we'll return the journal entry so the caller can use and access the members inside of it. Else, if the journal is still locked, we're going to return null. So what this means is, to the caller of the journal class, if I ever access this entry property, I want to check if it's null. And I know if it's null, then the journal is locked, and I should display a locked message. Now in this case, we're not going to add a setter because we don't need to change this value of the entry ever. We just need to retrieve it. So this is called a read-only property. Alright, so that's it for this exercise. There's nothing visual that has changed. We just started building some of the foundation for dealing with our menu and actually dealing with creating this journal entry. Okay, next we're going to start talking about loops. And the reason why we're going to do this is because we have to build a console menu. And using a loop will allow us to repeat the menu over and over. So we're going to begin by talking about a do while loop, which may be a new loop to you, but it's useful for building menus, so that's what we're going to start with. And then we'll actually see an example of building a console menu using a do-while loop. So what exactly is a loop? A loop is nothing more than a statement that will repeat a block of code for under two conditions. Either it will repeat it for a set number of times, or it will repeat it until some condition is met. So, for example, in the screenshot, you can see a basic example of a loop. We're just displaying hello world 10 times. So the way we can create this is we could use a do-while loop. So a do-while loop is very similar to a while loop, except for one big difference. And that is a do-while loop guarantees one execution of the body no matter what. And then after that, it will continue to run as long as the condition is met. Now, I want to point out, notice that the condition is at the end of the loop. This is what actually guarantees the loop to run once. So if you read this from top down, we declare a counter called x to hold how many times we've iterated. And then we say do, and then in the body of the do loop, notice how there's no condition yet. So the system just says, oh, let me execute the first body execution. And then when I'm done with that, then we have a condition. Then we say only do this while x is less than 10. So as you can see, it guarantees one execution because the loop condition is at the end of the loop. All right, so let's look at an example of creating a menu system. So once again, here we're using a do-while loop, but let's go through some of this code. So it's common to have some type of user choice. So we declare an integer called choice to capture that, and then we enter the do loop. So no matter what, this menu will print once. So I print out a simple menu, and then I ask the user for a choice. So I say, okay, what do you want to do? Once we have the choice, this ... represents how we process that choice, but that's not really important in this case. After we have a choice, we say, okay, well, this loop should continue running for as long as the user didn't type in quit. So the quit option is number 4. So we're saying while the choice is not 4, continue to print this menu. The moment you type 4, the loop exits and the program terminates. All right, so let's jump now into our third exercise and let's build the console menu for our journal application. All right, so here we are in exercise 3, creating a console menu. So this is going to be our output from this exercise. We'll actually see a menu. So to do that, the first step we're going to create the menu loop. So this is going to be a do-while loop. And then we'll look at building the building blocks for processing the selections. We're not actually going to process it in this exercise, but we'll build the structure for it. All right, so let's jump back to our code. Okay, so here we are back in program.cs inside the main method. And we're going to build first the console menu loop. So we're going to use a do-while loop. So we start with the do keyword, and then we build the body. Now, the body needs a condition at the end of it. So let's start off by creating a variable to capture the selected choice. So we'll say int choice, semicolon. Now, at the end here, we're going to say while the choice is not equal to 5. The reason why I'm picking 5 for now is because I know 5 is the quit option, which we'll see in just a moment. So forget this error just for a second. We'll come back and we'll fix that. And also, don't forget a semicolon at the end of the while. All right, so now inside the body of the loop, let's start building our menu. And once again, you can do this any way you like with using any text. So let's start off by saying \n menu : right? We'll copy some of these lines. So in the next one, we'll say some of our options. So here we'll say option number 1 is to unlock the journal. Option number 2 is to create an entry. Option number 3 is to read an entry. Option number 4 is to lock the journal. And option number 5 will be to quit the program. And then if you want, you can add, another line in to maybe, have like a separator. You can do whatever you want here. You can completely personalize it. All right, so there's our simple console output. After we print that, the user is going to enter a choice. So we'll say choice equals int.parse console.readLine. Remember, console.readLine returns a string, so we have to convert it to an integer by using int.parse, and then we store it in choice. And notice that the error went away. The reason why that error was there was because choice didn't have a value yet. So it was saying you really can't use it until it has a value. So now it has a value for sure after that line. Cool. Okay, so we have the menu, we have the response from the user. The next thing we have to do is we need to process that result. So if I enter 5, for example, I want to quit the program. Or if I enter 1, I want to prompt them to enter a password. So to do that selection, we're going to use a switch statement. You could also use a series of if statements if you wanted, but a switch is a little bit more elegant. So we'll say switch choice, and then we'll just list the cases. So we'll say case 1, break. So if they select the option 1, this will be the code for that selection. So let's just take this, and let's copy and paste this. So we'll have case 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so that's it for now. We're not going to go back and add code just quite yet to these cases, but as you can see, if I run this program now, my journal is displayed, and if I type something, it will keep on displaying my journal as long as I don't type 5. If I type in 5, the program quits because that exits the loop. The condition is while it's not 5. And obviously, it's not doing anything because there's no code in those cases just quite yet. All right, so let's jump back to our slides. All right, so the last section for this class is actually creating methods and adding behavior. We have the basic structure down for our application, but it's not doing anything yet. So we're going to implement that through methods. So we'll start by defining and looking at the syntax for a method, and then we'll look at how you invoke a method. Okay, so what is a method? A method is really a code block that we can put into a class that should be related to that class. Now, as you can see here, we have a bunch of methods. We'll actually go through the syntax in just a second, but notice the names, right? Turn on radio, accelerate, lock. These are all operations that are related to the class itself. They have context to the class. So in this case, a car. So how do we create a method? So a method is defined by a few pieces. First, we have the return type. So in this case, the return type is void. That means that we're not returning any data. We're just doing an action, and that's it. The caller will not retrieve a value after it. Then we have the method's name. So in this case, we're calling it accelerate. Then in parentheses are the parameters. So the parameters in this case, we just have one, but the parameters are the required data that the method expects. This is normally a piece of information that the method needs in order to do its job. So for example, in accelerate, we expect the delta, which is the change in speed, how much we're going to increase by. And then we have the body of the method. This is actually where the code goes to perform the task for that operation. So to accelerate, we take our speed and we increase it by the delta. So this is how we create a method. And then how do we call or invoke it? Well, first we need to have an instance of our car. So here you can see we have Sam's car. And to invoke it, we access the Sam's car object and we access the method's name. So here we have accelerate. And then we need to provide the parameter. So remember, it took an integer for the delta. So we had to pass in an integer here. Now, if you don't provide that integer here, you will get a compile time error because the method needs that integer in order to do its job. All right, so it's time to jump to our last exercise, which is to define some methods and invoke them in our menu. All right, so here we are in exercise number 4, and notice that the final output is the completed solution. All the functionality will be done in this exercise. So we'll start by creating some methods. We'll create lock and unlock methods. And then inside the console menu, we'll implement the logic for each option that was selected. And then finally, as an optional step, you can add in some console color. So I'll show you some basic methods that we can use to change the color of the text of the console. As you can see, for example, here, I change the text to green when I open it. When I display the message, I make it blue, and so on. So let's jump back to our code and let's build this application. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to build methods to lock and unlock the journal inside of the journal class. So go ahead and head there, and let's start with making a unlock journal method. So we'll say public bool. So the reason why we're saying bool as the return type is because we're going to return true or false to indicate whether or not the password that was used was correct or incorrect. So we'll say public bool unlock journal, and you have to provide a password as a parameter. So in order to call this method, you have to provide a string called password. Okay, next we're going to say, well, was the password correct? So we'll use an if statement. We'll say if the journal password, which remember is the password that we defined up here, if the journal password is equal to the password that was typed in, then let's unlock the journal. So we'll say journal unlocked, which is managing the state of the journal. We'll set that to true, and then we'll return true back to the caller so that he knows the password was correct. Okay? Now, else we'll say return false to indicate the password was incorrect. Back to the caller. So that's our unlock journal method. And then for the lock journal, it's a lot easier. We'll say public void because we're not going to return anything in this case. We're just locking it. So lock journal, we don't need any parameters either because you don't need a password to lock it. And then we'll say journal unlocked equals false. Now it's locked again. All right, so now let's jump back to program.cs and let's actually implement some of these options. So let's start with case 1. Now remember, case 1 is to unlock the journal. So if they type in 1, the first thing we need to say is, okay, well, what is the password that you're going to enter? So we'll say enter journal password. And then we have to read the password in. So we'll say string password equals console.readLine. And then we need to say, okay, well, let's actually attempt to unlock it with this password. So we'll say if, because remember, the unlock method returns a bool. So we'll say if my journal dot unlock journal, passing in the password as a parameter. If that is true, since we're in an if statement, so if we successfully unlocked it, we can print to the console saying you opened the journal. Okay. Now, if that's false, meaning the password was incorrect, then we can just, display incorrect password. All right. So that's the functionality for the lock. Next, let's do number 2, which is the create entry option. So in case 2, remember, if the journal is locked, we don't want them to be able to create an entry. So if you go back to our journal class, in order to add the entry text, we need to access this property. And if the journal is locked, it returns null. So what we want to say is, we want to say if my journal dot the journal's entry is null, that means the journal is locked. So we'll display a message saying, you must unlock the journal first. Okay. Now we want to make sure that we don't continue executing here. So we could add a break if you wanted to add some logic down here. Now this break is not necessary if you're going to add an else instead. So it's up to you how you want to program this. I'll show you both ways. So let's first just remove the break. So we have that. So in the else part, which means the journal is unlocked, we're going to ask them, okay, well, what journal entry do you want to create? So I'll say, okay, enter the journal text. Let's take that message. So we'll say string journal message equals console.readLine. So whatever they typed will capture it. And then we want to say, okay, let's take this message and let's put it inside of the journal entry. So we have my journal dot, remember we have the entry, which is the actual journal entry property. And on the journal entry, there's a property called text. So I'll dump in the journal's text like that. So in this case, this is fine code. Another way of writing this would be if I put a break here and then no else here. That is also okay, because remember, if the journal is locked and we hit this break, the switch statement exits, so we never reach this anyway. Whereas if the journal is unlocked, we skip over this whole section and then we execute this code. So either is okay. I'm going to go back and I'll leave it like this and I'll remove the break. Okay, case number 3. So in case number 3, this is to read our entry. So once again, we're going to start off with saying if the journal entry is null, so we can just copy that. If it's null, you have to first unlock it. Else, if the journal is unlocked, what are we going to do? We're going to just print the journal entry. So we'll say console.writeLine, myjournal.entry.text. So we'll print the journal's text. And then in this case, when it comes to printing, we also want to print the time it was last edited. So this is a little bit long. We're going to do some formatting here. We'll say console.writeLine, last edit, colon, space. Let's concatenate here. So we'll say myjournal.entry. So we want the last edit time. Let's first print the date. So there's a method called toShortDateString. This will print the date in a short format. Then let's concatenate. We'll add a space to separate the date and time. So there's a space. And then we'll say myjournal.entry.lastEditTime.toLongTimeString. So we're basically printing a short date and a long time. The long time includes like the seconds and things like that. Okay. So that's case 3. Then finally we have case 4, which is to lock the journal. This is a simple one. In case 4, we simply say myjournal.lockJournal, and we're done. Now for case 5, I added this if you wanted to add some code for when you quit the program. We're not going to be doing that, so we're going to leave it blank, but we could also just remove it. It's up to you. We're not going to use anything with that. So if I run the application at this point, let's see what happens. All right, here it is. So let's start with trying to create an entry before unlocking. So we'll type in 2. And notice that it says you must unlock the journal first. Cool. So let's unlock it. We'll type in 1, and then the password is 1234. The journal is now open. Now I can create an entry, hitting 2 again, and let's enter my text. So we'll say hello world, enter. Cool. Let's try locking the journal by typing 4, and let's try reading it by typing 3. And notice it says, once again, we have to unlock. Okay, so let's unlock again. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We're unlocked the journal. Now let's try to read the journal. 3. There's our message, hello world, the last time it was edited. And let's try 5 to quit. Cool. Everything's working. So the last thing to do to complete this for fun is to add some color to the console. So let's start with adding some color to incorrect password and like error messages. So for example, here we have incorrect password. So let's say console.foreground color equals console color.red. So we'll say errors are red. And then we can add colors anywhere else we want. So for example, when we open the journal, we can say console.foreground color equals console color maybe a green for success. I'm going to copy this line to make it easier. So for the error messages, let's do red again. So we'll put a red message there. Another red message here. Now for printing out, I changed it to like a blue color. So we'll say console.foreground color equals color. I think, yep, I did this. And that's it. Those are all the messages. Now you can go through this. You can add more colors. You could change the colors to whatever you want. Like for example, I think I made the last edit color back to its original color. So I'll just say console.foreground color here equals, and you can like look through these and you can see what colors are available. So I'll just set it back to the gray color that it is by default. And then the last thing we need to know is when you change the console color, it will stay that color from then on. So for example, if it displays you must unlock the journal, it will be red. But the problem is it will stay red. So at the end of our switch statement, this is the end. You can see this is the switch. We'll just say console.reset color, and that will reset it back to its default color after every selection. Okay, so here we are. So let's try 2. There's the red. Let's unlock it. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's our green message. Let's create an entry. Hello world. And then let's read it. And there's that blue. So as you can see, the colors are working just fine. And we have our completed journal application. All right, so throughout this course, we looked at the key components that we learned in the previous C# classes. Remember, we looked at creating custom types by defining a class. We looked at creating properties to control access to our data. We looked at loops to create a menu. And then we looked at methods to add behavior. So that brings us to the end of this video recording today. I want to say thank you for spending the time going through it, and enjoy the rest of your day.